Okay, could you start off by introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Charles Hamilton, General Manager of the Carpinteria Valley Water District.
And tell me, what have been some of the big issues to do with water over the last 50 years?
Well, we generally are the agency responsible for the delivery of drinking and agricultural water to the community. And over the last 50 years, we've seen a lot of requirements come from the federal and state government relative to drinking water quality and standards, and also through an election process that occurred in 1991, a major investment in the State Water Project by this district and this community.
Why was it 1991?
We were at what turned out to be at the end of a 3-year drought, 88-91, and there was a proposal put forward to the voters in Santa Barbara County, including Carpinteria, in an election to determine whether or not the county should participate in the State Water Project, which meant anywhere between a $500 and $600 million construction project connecting the county to the state California aqueduct that runs up and down the state.
I'm going to pause it right there. So could you say that again, that there was a drought in 88-91?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Before I arrived here, there was in this Carpinteria Valley a major drought involving the Kachuma project between 1988 and 1991. And at the end of the drought, the voters in Carpinteria Valley, as well as Santa Barbara, Montecito, Goleta, and throughout the county, approved participation in the State Water Project. It resulted in the construction of a pipeline and pumps and other facilities connecting Lake Kachuma with the California aqueduct. And very expensive project, but completed probably 95, 96.
And I know the voters were unhappy about that some years past. Now, does it seem like a good thing, or have we used it much? What are your thoughts about it?
Really, you know, at the time the election was held, there was a lot of emotion, and Lake Kachuma was very low, and almost 2/3 of the voters supported it. But there were some contentious issues then related to the long-term use of the project as it might pertain to growth and be growth-inducing. And that was a big issue. But more than that, the decision by Carpinteria to obligate itself to as much as 2,000 acre-feet was extremely expensive. And in retrospect, in hindsight, it appears that that decision was an overinvestment, that most likely, again, with 20/20 hindsight, we could have made do with half that amount. And so we would have ended up paying for half of the costs that we've had to pay for ever since the rates had to go up in the 90s. And that's been a burden for the district, and of course a burden for the customers, as you know, primarily.
And now we're having a new drought. Is it now useful?
It is, these last couple of years of the drought turning out to be a really valuable connection because of the lack of Kachuma water, and to some extent for Santa Barbara and Montecito, lack of groundwater. Both the other agencies, and I'll mention Carpinteria as well, we've all been using the facilities this year as much as possible to import state water, whether it's water that's available in the current year entitlement, or water that's been banked somewhere else, or water that we've purchased on the market from other agencies, sellers of water in other parts of the state.
So that's good to hear. That's useful.
It is good to hear. It's still the verdict is still out on the value, how much it's cost in order to have the use of the project these last couple of years. I would add, though, if we see a continuation of the local drought, the state water project connection each year will go up in value because it remains our only connection to an outside source of water and to the state water system and water marketing. So it could turn out to be the backup supply that really does carry all of the South Coast communities forward, in addition to their use of groundwater, which isn't available to every agency.
And California is not out of water that we're importing here?
Well, that's part of what's happening in this drought that's didn't happen before. Typically, there are droughts that are more localized. What we're experiencing now is a drought that's impacting almost the whole state. And so the sources of supply for state water are declining and dramatically. And so the available supply that might come through that system is much less than we, of course, would like it to be. But it's still there. And if there were, by chance, another year of drought in the Cachuma area, but not in Northern California, then we would have that state water system to bring that water into Lake Cachuma and to the South Coast, Carpinteria Valley.
Can you describe the drought in the early 90s and then describe this drought?
Well, the drought in the early 90s, which I wasn't here for that. I was working at another water agency, actually up in the Delta for the East Contra Costa Irrigation District, was quite similar up to now, with couple of key differences. We've experienced in this drought some of the hottest weather on record, hottest and driest weather in a couple of years. So while we've experienced the same length of drought, the severity of the drought has been record-setting in this current drought that began in 2011. So that's different. There are other factors weighing on available water supplies in this drought that did not exist in 89-90. Well, first of all, in 89-90, there was no state water project connection. So all of the folks in this area were much more vulnerable. But since that drought, the state water project has been has become obligated to release a great deal of water for environmental purposes, for endangered species restoration and habitat. And so the available supply from the state has gone down. There have been, since 89-90, new agreements as to the use of Lake Cachuma water, something through a process called the settlement agreement that involved the settlement of a lawsuit with Lompoc and others. The downstream water rights users of the dam and the project are now entitled to a significant portion of water from the lake that's stored in the lake. That's a new development that did not exist when we had the drought in 89, 90, 91. And then secondly, there are now, as a result of the Endangered Species Act and requirements through a biological opinion, that we release some of that project water downstream on a regular basis for steelhead habitat and restoration. So a lot of variables that come into play with these supplies, whether it's Lake Kachuma or state water, have changed the equation a lot. And primarily this drought so far has been the most severe compared to the 89-90 drought, 91.
Do you have a thought whether it has to do with global warming?
You raise a really important point. That was not, climate change had not been really identified as a problem by the water agencies, by the water community in 89, 90, 91. There may have been some rumblings about it, but it was not mainstream information, and it is now. And all the water agencies, from the federal government through the state to the local agencies, now realize that climate change is significantly impacting the reliability of our supplies, the reliability of state water, the reliability of local water. Groundwater can only be replenished by rainfall. We've had some of the driest years on record. The temperatures have increased in the Sierra so much that the snowpack that we typically rely on from the Sierra is not materializing. It's just it's not enough cold weather to hold the snow and the precipitation in those mountains. And that, we feel, is a climate change variable. We think that's definitely a product of the warming. Well, it is a product of the warming temperatures, the average temperatures during the winter, and climate change.
What have been some of the major projects over the last 50 years that you're aware of?
Well, 50 years doesn't go back far enough, quite back far enough to when the Kachuma project was built, because the Kachuma project was actually built in the early 50s. But shortly after the Kachuma project was built, approximately 50 years ago, the water community and the water world started experiencing, became aware of drinking water concerns that did not exist relative to drinking water standards for bacterial contamination and what we call disinfection byproducts, when a disinfectant like chlorine interacts in the water and creates disinfection byproducts, which is a very technical, sort of medical scientific issue. But to make a long story short, the very first response to that was the Carpinteria Valley Water District's connection to the City of Santa Barbara's Cater treatment plant. That treatment plant was the system that we rely on for our Lake Kachuma water was not designed with water treatment facilities. That came about during the 60s through the Environmental Protection Agency and resulted in water standards that previously did not exist. And so we've had to deal with the water treatment side in a huge way that goes back about 50 years. And that set the stage for some other projects that we've had to build in the last 20 years.
Okay, let's pick that up in just a sec. So you were saying that the standards in drinking water have been revised. Is it because there's more scientific information to help do that?
Exactly. We've learned a great deal more about the at the molecular level and what's in water.
If your mic's like, you were saying?
Yeah, advances in science and technology have enabled us to know a great deal more about what's in our water at the molecular level. We didn't have that technological capability to measure parts per billion of constituents in water until really about 50 years ago. And so that, along with research done by the physicians and medical professionals, has led to more rigid standards relative to drinking water quality.
And so what are some of the projects that needed to be done because of that?
Well, beginning in the 60s and 70s, we had to develop filtration treatment, water treatment systems that involve filtration, and Carpinteria partnered with the City of Santa Barbara and actually with Montecito Water District for that construction project. But then,
and where was that project?
In Santa Barbara.
At the Cater?
And the outcome was the construction of the Cater treatment plant in Santa Barbara. All of the water that the district receives from Lake Cachuma passes through that treatment plant. It's filtered and treated there.
And when approximately was that finished?
In the 60s, approximately.
Late 60s?
Yeah. But that set the stage for a lot of other things related to water quality, new standards that were promulgated by the Environmental Protection Agency and then passed down to the state for state enforcement through the Department of Public Health. Our biggest challenges turned out to be the uncovered reservoirs that provide surface water to this area. When the Bureau of Reclamation built the Cachuma project in the 50s, it included a distribution system of something we call the South Coast Conduit, the major pipeline. After water comes out of Lake Cachuma through the Tecolote Tunnel. It comes into that big pipeline, which runs from Goleta through Santa Barbara, Montecito, and Carpinteria, with various laterals going off that pipeline. And as part of that distribution system, two reservoirs were constructed, one in Summerlin called Ortega Reservoir, which provides water to both the Montecito Summerlin communities as well as Carpinteria Valley Water District, and then the Carpinteria Reservoir, which is at the end of the system on a hill not just across the valley from Kate School. And
when were those built approximately?
They were built in the 50s also, but they were not covered. At that time, there was the medical advances and research and technology had not brought us to a level of awareness and understanding about the need to cover those reservoirs. What we did then was take the water that passed through the Cachuma project system that was distributed through the Cater treatment plant, and we would store it in these open reservoirs. But at that point, that water that had been treated and filtered in the Cater treatment plant was subject to contamination from airborne debris, from birds, people who even managed to find a way to swim in those reservoirs. And
even though it wasn't legal.
It definitely restricted and not legal. And what we were doing to compensate for that type of recontamination in these open reservoirs was shocking the water with chlorine. Of course, that gave the water that our customers eventually got a bit of a chlorine taste, a whiff of chlorine that was noticeable. Made the water safe in that respect, that it was re-chlorinated, disinfected. But the state as a whole decided that even that was not good enough, and they promulgated a new requirement that all uncovered reservoirs, like these two reservoirs, be either covered or taken out of service. In other words, the state no longer would allow delivery of drinking water to customers through these types of uncovered reservoirs. That resulted in a huge expense for this district. We looked at that for about a year and a half, studied it, and came up with what we called our capital improvement program at that time, which involved the construction of a cover, an aluminum cover on the Carpinteria Reservoir, and then also another big cover on the Ortega Reservoir. And we split that project in cost. We split that with Montecito Water District. So that was the beginning of something that had completely not been anticipated. In the mid to late 90s, but it came at a time that we were also, as a water agency, beginning to raise the rates for state water. So we found ourselves having to raise the rates much more rapidly and to a higher level than anyone foresaw. It created quite a bit of unhappiness among the customers. We had quite a few people objecting to the higher water rates, and even today that remains a sore point with many of the people in Carpinteria, that we did go through that process of raising the rates so much, so quickly, and in particular for the State Water Project, because there was controversy over that project to begin with, folks who didn't really support it, and then the decision by the district to invest so heavily.
When did the complaints about water rates particularly happen? Was it like mid-90s to...
They started in the late 90s and then continued into the, well, they continued through today, but they became quite vocal through the public protest hearing process in about 5 to 6 years ago, when we had hundreds of protests related to rate increases. The community is throughout the state. There was a proposition passed called Prop 218, which in the late 90s was promoted as the right to vote on taxes, and as it worked its way through the courts, it became applicable to water district rates. And we're now required every year for every rate increase to notify the public that they have the right to lodge protests about those rate increases. This is what every public agency must now do, not just for taxes, but for water rates. And we've done that. And through that process, we've found that 5, 6, 7 years ago, we started to get quite a few protests through that process. So it's created an edge that we at the district, the directors, myself, staff, have had to work with and live with, because our job is to provide a healthy and safe, reliable water system to everyone who lives here. That's all we do. We don't make a profit off of this water system. It's basically, we certainly have jobs, make our living through it, but it's something that we have to do, and that everyone in the public needs and appreciates. But we have to do that. We've had to do that now with this, I'll say, edge, with this edginess about the high water rates and costs. And unlike some of other agencies, we, long before the Great Recession that began in 2008, we reduced our expenses and operations to what I consider to be minimal levels, not necessarily always adequate for everything we'd like to do, but minimal levels. And we have had to postpone what in a normal setting would be routine replacement of old pipes and meters and so on. We've had to postpone some of that expenditure in order to slow down the rate increases in the context of a community concern that they'd gone up too high, too fast.
What other big projects have there been in the last 50 years, and maybe the storage tanks? When you
Yeah, definitely. We as we worked forward with this, as we planned for this reservoir covering project addressing water standards, we determined that we needed a new storage tank to help us with that issue of water quality, because our groundwater doesn't have the same water quality problems that we have through surface water that comes from Lake Chuma. We wanted to improve our ability to store that groundwater and access it and use it. And so we developed if you start with the Carpinteria Reservoir and the Ortega Reservoir, we developed a third project which is now called the Foothill Storage Tank, located at the lower reach of Rancho Monte Alegre. And that tank now allows us to produce water from our wells, pipe it directly into that storage tank, and then blend it back into the system, improving the water quality that comes from the Lake Cachuma source. And if necessary, if we should ever lose the Lake Cachuma source, have an emergency fallback supply that we can manage to, for probably most all of the customers in the Carpinteria Valley, provide a level of drinking water to meet health and safety expectations if we should lose the Cachuma system. That became the third big project. And a fourth project had to do with the headquarters well. We used to call it the Santa Ynez well. It was actually drilled during the drought of 90-91. It needed to be re-drilled, and we did complete that major well. A fifth project that came into being that affects our ability now to handle the drought, and at least so far, and give us some greater reliability, and that mix the groundwater, was the well at the El Carroll Park. We call it the El Carroll well. So we've gone through, in the last 20 years, really a very large amount of, for a community this size, and for the customer, the size of this customer base, quite an ambitious construction program. We're seeing the results of that construction program, but it was, again, part of that issue of how do we pay for it, and how do we raise the rates, and we're here with that situation again today.
Can you talk a little bit more about the storage tank up on Foothill, how it came about, and how it has to do with the Franklin Trail and the new property back there?
Well, we were looking around for a location for a tank that would allow us to gravity feed, take the water from the wells and gravity feed back to the system. And the first place we looked, it turned out to have a geologic issue related to seismic safety, and we hadn't found another site within the district. So we looked outside of the district boundaries at that time, onto Rancho Monte Alegre, which appeared to potentially be a good location, and determined that it was a geologically good site for which we would use for an underground storage tank, which we did. And as a part of that, acquiring that land, we acquired 10 acres of land for that storage tank site. We entered into an agreement with the owners of the ranch. That was really, I guess you could say, a deal. They were giving up a piece of land in a valuable part of the lower part of the ranch for the district to access and build a tank. We compensated them for that. It wasn't as though they gave us the land, but as part of the exchange for that cooperative arrangement, we said, well, we'd like you also to annex to the district. We did not want them to develop their water rights to the tributary creeks of Santa Monica Creek and Carpinteria Creek. We felt that, you know, that would be better served by the district, come into the district. And so they did that. We also agreed, as part of this quote deal, to build a road that would go through the ranch, allow access to upper reaches of the ranch, at the same time that we built the pipeline that would supply water in the ranch. And it went through an environmental review process and resulted in a lawsuit filed against the district by the Carpinteria Valley Association. They viewed the project as growth-inducing and challenged the environmental document on that basis. So it became a very complex project. Not only was it a purchase of land with a private owner and the construction of a road, it put us at odds with the environmental community in the Carpinteria Valley, concerned about the potential for a lot of growth on the ranch, housing growth mainly, population growth. And that set us back a little bit in terms of our credibility as we moved forward, but
how was that resolved?
I think the issue got resolved in the courts, and the court said no, there isn't. The district did an appropriate environmental document. I think there are some today who probably wish it would have remained open space, and there have been a couple of homes built up there so far, but for a variety of reasons, including the Great Recession, it did not progress as rapidly as the original owners thought it would. As far as the district's concerned, we were able to build and complete our storage tank. So we have the facilities that we decided we wanted and needed, and it's working very well for us. The ranch is still going through a process with the county relative to permitting and construction. One of the conditions that came out of this process was from the ranch owner an offer to allow the Franklin Trail to be revisited, I should say maybe rebuilt. I'm not sure what they're going to do exactly with the trail, but they're to allow for access for residents in Carpinteria to literally walk from the high school up into the foothills and enjoy the vistas from the foothills behind us.
Did the Rancho Monte Alegre owners negotiate with the county to have right to build back there in part by giving up some access for the trail to go through?
Exactly. It was not a part of the district negotiation. It was with the county that occurred. But of course it wouldn't have happened if the district hadn't gotten involved in the first place with the annexation. Annexing the ranch, it was a pretty significant number of acres, and I'll have to say one of the results was, I think, because of the interest of the environmental community, the Carpinteria Valley Association, the ranch was willing to place the lion's share of the acreage of the ranch into a permanent trust. So it's through that easement and trust now that the building envelope for homes, and I think there could possibly be as many as 50 homes or structures. On agricultural property you can have 2 homes, so if you have 25 lots you could have up to 50, something along those lines. But that building envelope was kept very small, And everything outside of that building envelope now is in a permanent conservation easement trust that involves the land trust of Santa Barbara County. That was a big deal for the Carpinteria Valley Association to reach that type of, if you want to call it a compromise with the project. I think it may have also been something that the owners took some initiative on as well. I wouldn't, but again, that put the district in somewhat of a difficult position with some people in the community who saw what we were doing as maybe unnecessary. Couldn't we have found a tank site somewhere else? Did we have to agree to annex that part of the valley into the district? So questions that came up through the whole process, some of which linger today.
I know one of the nearby homeowners is author Ann Bardock. Can I ask you what she was objecting to, and did you work something out?
Well, yes. Ann Bardock and others along that foothill corridor were largely concerned about the construction process that we had to undertake in order to build the storage tank. And then they were concerned about the type of traffic that was going to result going in and out of that project. So for them it was largely the construction issue and the interruption to their bucolic lifestyle that might occur from and we definitely had some problems there. We at one point were given a stop order by the county during our trucking of there's one of the problems with the storage tank construction is there's huge numbers of boulders in the soil up there, rocks, and we had to remove them, and that became an issue, removing the rocks. And
where did you move the rocks to?
We ended up not moving the rocks. The ranch ended up solving that problem for us and storing them somewhere else on site on the ranch. We also had an issue with one of the neighbors relative to storm runoff that was going to occur because of the construction of the road and the storage tank. And again, we worked that through. The ranch stepped up and built a storage, a storm flow facility, a pipeline that rerouted that water into Santa Monica Creek, which is channelized and serves as the major runoff channel for rainfall in that area. Santa Monica Creek actually has a dam up on the top of it built for flood control purposes and storm control. And so were all of these sorts of things anticipated? No, they weren't, but they became major efforts on the part of the district to address them as reasonably as we possibly could, and without excessive costs to the district.
Can I ask whether former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger bought one of the properties up on Rancho Monterey?
The Schwarzenegger family did buy one of the properties, yes. Yes.
Have they developed it yet?
No, that property today is not, has not been improved, and I think it remains for sale.
Is he going to run for city council? Or water
Yeah,
district?
you know, it's my understanding it's not really, it may be in a trust fund or something. It's not something that's the family is actively involved with at all, but as far as I know, it's still he still has ownership of all of it, if not a good portion of it, and it may be his wife who owns some or more of it as well, his former wife.
Going to the future, what are your thoughts of what the future looks like here in the valley as regards water?
Gosh, right now the future is so overshadowed by the severity of the drought that if the drought were to continue, and it may, we are going to find ourselves more and more reliant on our groundwater, our local groundwater resource, and maybe even doing some additional well development to meet those needs as we go forward. Fortunately, with some
hold on just a second.
Sure.
We need to change the battery.
yeah.
So, well, I'll let you finish your mouthful. Sorry about that. So you were saying about the future?
Well, not only development of wells and becoming more resourceful about our groundwater management, hopefully partnering with the growers. Many of the growers have private wells to manage it cooperatively. We are going to develop, I think, most likely with the cooperation of the sanitary district and some additional funding from the city of Carpinteria, a recycled facility at the sanitary district, so that we can incorporate the use of recycled water into our suite of supplies for this area. Until recently, we've been reluctant to go down that road because the cost of the capital cost of developing recycled facilities and the pipes associated with it is very high, and on top of the high water rates that we already have, we thought maybe we were maxed out, but things are changing. The state now is, through Proposition 1 and other funding sources, making a lot of grant and loan money available to agencies like ours who can demonstrate a project to develop recycled water. And so we have, as I speak now, a feasibility study in progress with hopefully some recommendation by October about what we can do realistically, who will buy the water, who can take the water, how it can be used in the Carpinteria Valley. So for us, that might mean as much as 10–15% of our supply that we normally have to take either from Lake Cachuma or our groundwater. We would be able to meet with the water that goes through the sanitary district. So we call that reclaimed water. Water might be used by growers. We expect there will be some growers who want to use it. It could be used by parks and by Caltrans for irrigation of greenscape, wherever that exists, if it still exists after this drought. And it could be used as water that we, if we clean it up to a level that's acceptable, we inject back into the groundwater basin to provide us with a source of supply. Right now there's so little rainfall, the groundwater levels are dropping. Without rainfall, if that were to continue, this would be a supply we could use to keep the groundwater level from dropping so fast. These are things that are being done in other parts of the state. So these are not questions of technology or capability. They're questions of marketing and funding and how that would affect the rates for the customers.
Nice. Is there anything else that comes to mind of big news stories in Carpinteria in the last 50 years that you would like to bring up?
In the last 50 years, gosh, no, you know, I would say, looking back, although I wasn't here when the city was incorporated, had the city not incorporated, there might have been a lot more development that would have put a lot more pressure on the district for water, for urban growth, commercial growth. And on the one hand, that might have enabled this district to handle the state water costs with less burden on the customers now. But on the other hand, I think it has resulted in the community remaining both a very viable small but urban community and a very viable and healthy agricultural community, which is quite unique. It's created I often talk about this water district as being two districts under one roof, because we sell typically about half of our water to growers and the other half to the residential commercial sectors of the community. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it is, looking back, that was a pivotal turn in the way this area has evolved, and it had a big impact on the district and, of course, everybody who lives here.
Nice. Anything else you'd like to say? I think you've covered a lot of good
I
ground.
think I have, yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for the great job you're doing, Charles.
All right.
And, thanks for the story. Then we'll
All right.
put this all online.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Okay. Still like to hear.
Good. Okay, that was great. Thanks, Charles.